Wednesday, June 12th, 2019. We have two items on the agenda this evening. The first one we're going to hear is a rules and procedure. You want to try to wait for Yem, city engineer?
I'm ready to go. It's up to you.
Okay, we got a couple administrative things. Let's see what happens. So we're going to hear from the Commissioner of Buildings and then the city engineer about traffic studies, proposed revision, and then we have an approval not required from 57 Olive Ave. We'll play it by ear after we finish our administrative stuff. First thing I'd like to do is read, for those in attendance under the provision of the open meeting law, attendees are informed that this meeting is being recorded by MATV. I have not been notified that any other video or audio recording of this meeting will occur. So with that said, we can move on to, yes, roll call, yeah. We can move on to a roll call. We'll start with Jim Chiavelli.
Jim Chiavelli, Planning Board.
Patrick Fitzgerald, Planning Board.
Ken Antonucci, Planning Board.
Chuck Iovan, Planning Board.
Michelle Romero, City Planner.
Eric McCush, Planning Board.
Pat Hayes, Planning Board.
Eric Henry, Planning Board.
Henry Susi, Planning Board.
Charlie Ferguson, Planning Board.
Very good. Thank you very much. Do we want, you want to give him a few minutes?
I'm prepared to explain it. I guess it would depend on if you guys have questions for him specifically.
Do Nelson, yeah. Okay, why don't you come up, Mr. Miller, and thank you for your time and coming up, speaking with us this evening. Let me put you on. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is under Rules and Procedures of the Malden Planning Board, the filing requirements, traffic impact study, section E9, proposed revision. Ken doesn't have to read anything because it's just a meeting. Good. Okay, Mr. Miller, please feel free.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Ms. Romero. So this is a change that had been proposed months back regarding the threshold for requiring a traffic study. We haven't dealt with what happens after you have to do a traffic study. If you're still required to do one, those rules are not being revised. All we've really addressed are who needs to do one and who doesn't. So as you're all aware, the current threshold for requiring a traffic study is based off of the size of the building that your proposed use is going into, not necessarily the size of the use that you're occupying. So a very small business or a very small use could be going to a very large building, and they'd have to do a traffic study based off of the size of the building or the plaza that they're going into. So in doing some research, myself and our city engineer looked into how other cities and towns equivalent to Malden, how they do their traffic studies and how they determine who needs one and who doesn't. Yem Lip, our city engineer, reached out to a few of his contemporaries in other towns and cities and got some information for them. And what they use is a system which takes a use, a given use, and assigns a value to it. That value then gets multiplied by the size of their use. So you take the square footage of that use, you multiply it by this value, which is determined by the Institute of Traffic Engineers, and it comes up with a number. What every city and town then does is establishes a number that for their city or town makes sense to require a traffic study. Some towns use 100, some towns use 50. It really depends on the makeup of your community. So in speaking to Yem, our city engineer, what made sense to him as a number would be a number of 60. So in the information you have in front of you, what you're going to see is you're going to see the changes to the actual rules of the planning board, and towards the end of that you'll see some tables. Those tables are produced by the Institute of Traffic Engineers, which nationally take specific uses and they do traffic studies on those uses and come up with how much traffic those particular uses create. And then they produce a number for that particular use. So if you look at that table, you can see that they're broken down pretty similarly to the way our ordinance is broken down: industrial uses, residential, recreational, institutional, and so on. So the proposal that you see in front of you is that there's really two parts to it. One is that the current uses which we have, which are automatically requiring a traffic study, which are 10 or more residential dwelling units, gasoline station, fast food or takeout restaurant, or any establishment with a drive-through, we haven't changed that. Those establishments will still require a traffic study under these new rules. All other uses would then have their square footage multiplied by the number from this table, which corresponds to their use, and then we've established a number of 60 trips as the threshold. If you hit that 60 or 70 or 80 or 100, you would then have to do a traffic study, no questions asked. If you don't hit that 60, what then happens is we would send your proposed use and your proposed location, which is the biggest part, to Yem, our city engineer, and then he would say, for instance, well, this particular proposed location, this particular use hit a number of 52, which isn't 60. However, it happens to be at the corner of Center Street, Main Street, so we'd like to evaluate that and have a traffic study done. So it essentially gives Yem the ability to override that number based off of local knowledge, or any other combination of factors that could possibly warrant a traffic study to be done. So the basis behind this, the idea behind this is that a lot of our smaller businesses, which are going into larger buildings, which for them, a traffic study is a monumental cost for the purpose of opening a business. Most of them will be thrust out of it. All of our larger uses in our larger buildings, which are for the most part larger companies or larger developers, they'll still be involved in a traffic study, and for the most part, the cost of it isn't prohibitive to them opening a business. So this is a system that is more commonly found amongst other cities and towns, locally and nationally. It's a little more, the system we have now is a little random. It's totally based off of the size of the building, where this is more weighted against the use that you're proposing to use and the size of it. So that's kind of the long and short of it. I can't give you any answers regarding the traffic engineering behind it, but I can certainly answer any questions you might have about the thought process behind it.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Miller, and I see the city engineer has just entered in, so his timing's
Fantastic.
impeccable. But yeah, no, I had the opportunity to discuss this with you and the city engineer previously in a draft version, and as I had said at that time, I think you guys did a lot of great work with it. I think it is definitely something we should seriously consider as a board. And as I had expressed to you guys, and you certainly made sure that was part of what was in your proposal, we were looking for something that was consistent, that was understandable, consistent, and could be applied across, scalable. We could apply it across all the various businesses that do come in front of us. As I also said, traffic is a major problem in the city, so I think the suggestion that we don't do traffic studies anymore isn't appropriate. So I thank you, and I like the fact that you were able to come up with something that is more progressive and more in line with the technologies available and how other cities and towns are handling this issue, because we're certainly not the only ones handling it, and able to make improvements over the current policy that we had. what I would like to ask you, and then before folks start chiming in on specific or more technical questions, but if you could just walk us through quickly, a petition comes in, what would happen? How would, when we talked before, you had described it, that you would review it, you would then, based on what you saw, I know we've identified 60 as the target that would trip the need for one, but as you had described previously, that you're not going to just look at 60 and above, you're going to take more of a holistic approach to it, and something that comes in at 55, depending on the nature of the use. If you could just describe what you expect the procedure to be and the process that a petition would follow, that would, I think, help a lot of the board members.
Absolutely, and that's a great question, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, in the system we currently have, the initial litmus test for a traffic study starts with me. So someone comes in, proposes a use, and I, or one of my building inspectors is required to look at that use, look at the size of the building going into, and say, okay, is this a traffic study, or is it one of the 3 uses that automatically trips a traffic study? And in the current process, when that happens, we say, okay, according to the rules, you have to do a traffic study. We get them and their engineering firm in touch with Ms. Romero. They sit down, they discuss the scope of the traffic study, and then they push on from there. Under this system, the initial litmus test would still begin with my department. So a proposed use comes in, myself, one of my inspectors looks at it and says, okay, is it one of the 3 uses that are automatic? No. Next question is, what's the size of the use? It's 5,000 square feet. Okay, let's hit the table. What's the factor that goes along with that 5,000 square feet? You multiply the 5,000 by the factor, and let's just say it comes to 70. Same process. Done deal. You have to do a traffic study, get your engineer, talk to Mr. Romero, talk about the scope of the traffic study, and you move on from there. Well, let's say it doesn't go to 70. Let's say it goes to 50. It goes to 50. We contact YEM. Hey, YEM, we have this proposed use of this size at this proposed location. Their factor comes up to 50. What do you think? And then he can take his local knowledge and say, yeah, that makes sense. Or, no, we have an issue with this intersection or that intersection or whatever. I think we still have to do a traffic study. And then the process from that point forward doesn't change. Engineer talks to Ms. Romero, he gets the scope of the traffic study, and it pushes on from there. So again, all we're really changing is the threshold for a traffic study. It's not as random as it is right now. There's a little more ability to evaluate it based off of not only the size of the use, but the local knowledge of our city staff, and then take it from there. So my department would be doing the initial evaluation just like we are now.
And the new proposal is a tighter correlation between the size and the actual use and what the experts have deemed should be the activity driven from that.
Absolutely, and just to give you, I don't want to kill you with numbers, but just to give you a kind of a synopsis of, how uses change, and most of you can probably relate to this, a walk-in bank. So 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we all walked to the bank and we did our banking, and now most of us don't. A lot of people do their banking either on their phone or from their house. So those numbers have changed. And to actually produce a lot of traffic for a walk-in bank, you have to have a pretty good square footage. We have a new bank right across the street at Eastern that, if you stood there all day and did a traffic count, they probably don't have 30 people a day that walk inside the place because everyone does their banking online. So this system of evaluating, of assigning a value to a size really takes modern uses into account. A little study that we did once we were done with this to see, basically, does this make sense? From Malden, is we took some common uses in the city of Malden, applied common sizes, and then took their numbers and applied those numbers and said, okay, what would happen? Just to give you an idea, a supermarket. If we had a supermarket, the supermarket would have to be 6,500 square feet or bigger to require a traffic study. Makes sense. Most supermarkets are bigger than 6,500 square feet. A convenience store, 960 square feet. That's, makes sense. Most convenience stores are bigger than 960 square feet, and they have a high traffic volume, right? A walk-in bank would have to be 5,000 square feet to require a traffic study. And that's really a commentary on the way these uses are used today, as opposed to if that walk-in bank was in a building that was 100,000 square feet, they'd have to do a traffic study, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So we did apply it to some real-world instances in the city to see if it made sense or not.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Miller or Mr. Lipp? Patrick Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the way I understand it, the way it exists now, there's just a square footage threshold that triggers yes or no. Under this new proposal, it leaves it in the discretion of the city engineer to essentially require it for potentially any type of petition, no matter the number. If we decide on 60, it could be 40, but if it's at some intersection that there's a, quote, issue with, it's a very subjective determination that's going to be decided by the city engineer to say, in this case, a traffic study is going to be required regardless of the number. So right now, if somebody wants to petition to have that waived, they have the ability to come before the board and ask for a waiver based on the existing. What due process is going to be in place for a petitioner if the city engineer says, the number comes to 40, but I'm going to require it anyways?
Yeah, and that's a great question.
And how to challenge it.
We didn't want to change the process at all once it was determined from the beginning that you needed a traffic study. The process from that point forward, we didn't want to mess with that because we think that's a process that you all are comfortable with. So if let's say, the initial evaluation says your number comes out to 40, and I send that information along to YEM, and I say, here's the proposed use, here's the location, their number comes to 40, and he says, well, okay, but it's at the corner of Ferry, Salem, and Main Street, so I think we should do a traffic study. We require a traffic study. Now, if they want a waiver from that, they go through the same process they go through now asking for a waiver. And then you all can decide, okay, yeah, YEM's crazy, or we think they should get a waiver or not. That wouldn't change at all. It essentially gives YEM the ability to look, the review on YEM's part is for the people who don't hit that number, but in reality, we think they should have hit that number.
Based on what? Just the location and the
He'd have to answer that.
intersection? Okay. I'm just worried about people claiming, there's not an equitable decision in each one that comes in, if there's some
Yeah.
unknown subjective criteria that's coming into play, as
Right.
opposed to something that they can check against and say, the last 4 people that came to this intersection didn't have to do one, but I come with a 30 and you're saying I have to.
Yeah, and I'll let YEM answer to that, because that would be his call.
Mr. Lipp, if you'd like to come up, that would be great.
Hi, good evening. So we're talking about trip generation for vehicles, cars, but, from my perspective, I look at the safety of the, pedestrian, bicyclist. If, we have 72 signals in the city, a lot of them are very old, antiquated signals. Obviously, you could use some upgrades, major upgrades. I look at it from that standpoint. If the traffic impact, it's not quite there, but I know that the intersection is not a safe intersection for pedestrian, and if I'm in the process of working on it or, looking at home improvements, I would like to, I guess, get some help from planning board if there's a development within the area, and this is great that I think that the planning board has the ability to, make some improvement up to our road configuration, the geometry or traffic signal phasing, timing, and all that. So that's where I would put my input in addition to the threshold that if it doesn't meet the threshold. Does that answer your question?
In part, I'm wondering if there's going to be, like you say, if there's certain problem intersections, or if at these traffic light intersections that you've identified, is that going to be something that's going to be documented and known to the petitioners ahead of time, that this is a particular intersection or location where, regardless of the number, it may very well likely result in a traffic study requirement.
I don't think we have that kind of record. I mean, it's a moving, the crash data or safety of the area. I guess I don't have that kind of information.
And I appreciate that. I think it just would be helpful to have some sort of criteria that you're going to take into consideration when you're making those types of decisions, when it's not as bright lined as it already is in the rule.
In the documentation we'll be sharing, would it be possible to make sure there's a section or a phrase that specifically spells out that there will be instances where the city engineer might overrule the transition factor being calculated? What are you guys' thoughts on that? So if we had a section that, as they're reviewing what needs to happen for the traffic, that would trigger traffic study, in there, clearly, not in fine print someplace, but clearly it says, at the discretion of the city engineer, any decision is dependent on the approval of the city engineer, or at the discretion of the city engineer. Something of that nature that would then put people on notice that, yeah, I came up to 55 or 58, and I may still have to do one, even though the policy says 60.
Stop me if I'm answering the wrong question, but and Ms. Romero and I spoke about this a little bit, I believe, yesterday. We purposely left that section vague. So you can see in the changes to the rules, there aren't a lot of changes. It's a couple sentences. But we purposely left the section vague regarding what YEM has the ability to review, because we felt that there were, or at least I felt that there were a number of different things that could cause YEM to say, they didn't hit 60, but we think they should hit a traffic study. It could be volume of an intersection, it could be improper signalization, multiple left turns, multiple right. It could be a multitude of things, and it's probably really location dependent and use dependent. If the use is a very, very low use, but in a difficult location, then maybe YEM would say, well, that's not really a factor. It could be a very, very intensive use in a very, very intensive location, and it doesn't hit that 60, but there's a whole bunch of reasons that he would want to cause that to happen. Now, I would think that in that denial process, or in the process for requiring a traffic study, those reasons would be listed specifically by YEM, and then that would be something that you as a planning board would have to review if that applicant wanted to request a waiver. And then you could say to you, as a group, you could say, well, they don't think it's a big deal, but we do. So we're not going to, grant the waiver. I'm not sure if that's the question you were asking or not.
No, that's good to know. And I guess to just picking up on the point that Patrick was raising, Michelle, you said it's in here, and
Yeah,
I just
I
scanned
was-
through and I didn't see it.
Yeah, I had, I'll just quickly add, so the last sentence of this paragraph on page 5, which says the city engineer shall make the final determination of the number of vehicle trips generated by the project. And then this section that's highlighted in blue, which I know is hard to read, I'm sorry. It's highlighted in blue because that was something that the city peer reviewer and I worked on the language. It didn't come directly from the building commissioner and engineer. It says, notwithstanding the number of trips, a traffic impact study may be required, and the necessity for a traffic study may be based on local knowledge as determined by the city engineer. The city peer reviewer actually had recommended more specific language that said, based on if there were a significant number of left-hand turns, he wanted specific, that was his specific concern, because he thought that even 20 left-hand turns could be a problem. The way it was originally phrased wasn't clear, so Nelson and I did talk, he didn't want to get that specific, putting in specifics about left-hand turns or different movements. So I came up with the language that basically was pretty broad, that says notwithstanding the number, the city engineer can make the determination. That's different, though, I'll say, than I think Patrick is asking about. Are there specific criteria, like the ones you just listed, movement, volume, things like that? But if the city engineer is going to give us a written determination for each thing, and he puts these reasons in, I think it should be clear. But, I mean, I agree, it is pretty broad, but it was my understanding that was the building commissioner's proposal. He wanted to make it broad so that there would be some leeway. So I don't know if that answers. I think there is language that covers it, but it's not specific.
If I can just add on to that, the left turn issue, I didn't feel like we wanted to pigeonhole Yem into just addressing that issue. I wanted to give him the ability to require a traffic study for any reason he felt constituted a traffic study.
And I guess what I'm looking at it now and stuff, I guess the multicolored and different pieces of it threw me a little bit. I guess what I would suggest, if we do end up going with something like this, that when all the colors are taken away, that whole sentence, the city engineer shall make the final determination, maybe that's bold, italicized, or something like that, just to make, my point was just to make it specific and so that people could see it.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't get lost in some of the other components.
And if I can add to that, currently, as we currently process these applications, there's a lot of explanation that goes along with traffic studies as they're currently constituted. So I wouldn't expect this to change that. We'd still be explaining this to people, and it may involve a little more explanation, actually. But I think ultimately those end users would find it a little more reasonable.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, Pat, are you all set?
Just to follow up on that, I appreciate that it doesn't need to be to that level of detail, but I do have concerns about, again, for the city engineer, having to make these judgment calls without necessarily a way for petitioners to see what the history is, or the decision-making process and what's taken into consideration. Again, it leaves it to be, in my opinion, a little bit too subjective. And again, nothing against the city engineer, not that he's not going to make sound decisions, but again, just to protect him in making these, which I assume are going to have some level of frequency, again, with this broad discretion, just to be able for everybody to know who's being granted. And again, I appreciate it and understand it would never be based on a petitioner's ability to pay or not. It would be strictly on the needs of the neighborhood. But I just would like to see something more, or if not necessarily in this document, but the city engineer or yourself keeping those records about this is a situation where it was under 60 and these are the particular factors that were taken into consideration and these were the reasons why, so that we can look back if we ever need to, if there's ever a claim of discrimination or unfair treatment. That's all. And if I may, just while they're both here, what was the number 60 based on?
Some community used 25, some community used 100. We feel that 60 correlate to 1 per minute for the 60 cars per hour. It's something that's, I can easily, it's a tangible number to me. It's 1 per minute.
What are other communities similar in nature to Malden using, that are using this kind of?
I believe Everett used 100. Everett used 100. Westford, which is
Yeah, I'm
more.
familiar. Yeah,
They use 25, and I think that's a little bit unrealistic.
right. Thank you.
If I can add to that, the sample uses that we ran that number 60 through, we also ran the number 100 through because we figured Everett was a pretty comparable community, and we came to find out that 100 really didn't make sense. So when we ran 60 through those numbers, through those uses, it started to kind of fall into line with honestly what made sense. There was no hard criteria.
Thank you.
And if I can just add on to what you had previously said, I completely understand the ability to explain this to the person applying, because to be honest with you, 90% of the time I'm the person explaining it to them. this seems like an easier thing to explain, and having a set of criteria that YEM could be evaluating them for makes a lot of sense. For when you tell them, hey, your number came to 45, but you have to do a traffic study anyways, they're gonna say, why? We have to tell them why. Under the current system, someone comes in for a 900 square foot building, a 900 square foot use in a 10,000 square foot building, and they say, how come I have to do a traffic study? And I say, well, because. So I think we could probably figure that out and give people a much better reason for doing a traffic study than we are today,
And to keep track of it, so.
and to keep track of it, yep.
Mr. Miller, in your sensitivity analysis and reviewing the different scenarios, did you ever encounter any instances where it came in higher than the 60 and that would, that you envision there could be an opportunity for the city engineer to say, well, the transition factor says you should do it, but I'm going to waive it?
The one use that jumped out at me, well, there were two uses that jumped out at me, and one of them, honestly, I don't think really matters, and the other one I think it does. The one use that jumped out was a daycare center. So for a daycare center, you'd have to have a 5,400 square foot daycare center. Now, you have to put that into perspective, that most of our daycare centers are allowed by right. There are six children or less. We have no governance over them anyways, so it doesn't matter how many cars they have. But if you think about a daycare center, people come in the morning, they drop their kids off, they come back at the end of the day and they pick them up, and that's the end of it. So that was one. Another one was a hair salon. You'd actually have to have a pretty large hair salon to establish a traffic study. You'd have to have a 41,000 square foot hair salon. And again, I think that has a lot to do with the way a hair salon is used. It's you know, people come and go, but they don't come and go every minute. They come and go every hour or 2 hours or whatever. I don't spend a lot of time at a hair salon. Right, Mr. Chairman? Yeah. So, you know, those were two that jumped out at me. But again, that's why we have the parachute of YEM, being able to look at a hair salon, going in at the corner of Ferry and Main and Salem Street and saying, well, you know, this doesn't make sense. We should evaluate this intersection.
Okay, thank you. Let me get to some of the other members who had questions. Eric Henry.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on to a couple of points that you and Patrick made there, I think it is more, I understand it, well, a lot of subjection in there. We're making pretty much a judgment call. And from what I understand, the testimony is the measure of that call was based a large part on local knowledge. So the property that came to my mind was South Cove. I don't know if you remember roughly, I wouldn't nail you to any numbers like that, but off the cuff, in its current location, and their second iteration that before this board, and I must say that that first iteration was quite traumatic when you have to tell 25% of the population that they cannot have access to this space right here. But I'm glad that they get it. But if they came at 59, 61, with Everett coming in at 100, what would it be your recommendation to the planning board if they chose to appeal that? What kind of guidance would you give us?
I'm lucky that I don't personally make recommendations based off of traffic studies. And, you know, that's certainly not my wheelhouse and not my purview now. I think something like South Cove, and I could not tell you how that current building or use, how it equates through this proposed system. I don't know if that would require a traffic study or not. But again, I think that falls back to the ability for our city engineer to look at it, and let's say it came at 58, for him to look at it and go, yeah, it came at 58, which is skin to your teeth, but, you know, we're looking at a medical center, we're looking at a particular population that's not all of it's coming from within Malden, it's coming from different places, it's at a pretty busy intersection as it is, Commercial, Medford Street, and I would think that he could come up with a pretty solid set of reasons why they would have to do a traffic study.
Yes, understanding that, but the development just side of Everett, they've done a lot of time and effort and resources into that intersection as well. So I'm sure they would want that considered, even if they came in at 62, they would want us to, I could see something like that coming before us. And right now, all I have to go on is local knowledge as a measure for that. Thank you.
Well, no, Eric, I don't understand where you're going with that, because if it hits 62, it requires a traffic study.
It automatically requires a traffic study,
Right.
yes. But does that automatically trigger their right to appeal?
Yeah, like anyone else.
Right, so
They
when
can
it,
request a waiver.
right, and at some point, somebody's gonna have, forgive my ignorance, it will come before us,
Well, yes.
okay?
And the peer review would
Say
weigh in.
it came in at 62 and it needs a traffic study.
Right, so, well, no, I would expect that peer review would be more in-depth than that, just like he has been. And that part, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but that part of the process hasn't changed, right? So we'd still get the recommendation from the peer review or a recommendation from the city, whether it be Nelson or Yems area, you know, so that we'd have that guidance on it also. But so are you more concerned about the appeal process, or are you more concerned about those that run up close to the 60 but don't meet it? I'm not sure.
I'm concerned about the appeal. I'm sure that these fine gentlemen do a fantastic job at what they do. I think on this basis is a great place to start. But we're going to see the appeals, and I'm wondering, you know, they have this subjective number of 60 based upon the math. Everett has 100. If someone is 60, say South Cove was at 60 based upon the figures, and they would come for us and they came to us for appeal. What do we base it on?
We would base it, I would think we
Well,
would base it on
yeah,
what the
it-
peer
we-
review and what the department weighs in on, saying why they should have to do it.
It doesn't matter. It's above 60. They're going to automatically say that. Unless he's going to say it's above 60, but based upon our local knowledge, we would recommend that this be waived. Does
If
that
I-
happen? I don't know.
If I can jump in, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman. So if you think about today's system, someone's opened up a pizza place that's 900 square feet, and it happens to be inside 11,000 square foot building. Well, they automatically have to do a traffic study. End of story. They have the right to appeal, and
Right.
they come to you, to this board with an appeal, and they make a case for why they don't have to do a traffic study. And essentially, your board's position on why they had to be there in the first place is because you're going into a building that's 10,000 square feet, which, in my opinion, isn't a strong argument. Under this system, a person has to do a traffic study, let's say South Cove, because they come in at a 61 or a 62 or a 60.
Fair.
So they say, well, that doesn't make sense, we want to appeal it. Appeal process doesn't change whatsoever. They come in and they make their case for why they shouldn't have to do a traffic study. Your position now is, well, based off of international, the traffic engineers' traffic studies, which is nationwide, your use is going to produce this amount of traffic based off of its size. And then on top of that, we've talked to our city engineer, and he says that the intersection of Commercial Street and Medford Street has a serious left turn problem. And then they kind of have to argue against that. So I don't personally see how your argument against an appeal gets any weaker. I actually think it gets stronger, because you now have hard statistics to back up an argument, as opposed to right now, your argument is, well, you're in a building that's 10,000 square feet.
Well, in fairness, though, that's not the argument. I mean, when you get a request for a waiver, we don't say it's because you're in 10,000. That's the reason it's triggered the study. We
Right.
say provide documentation to support your waiver. And they say ITE manual says I'm only going to generate 20 trips. The peer reviewer looks at it and says, no, you're gonna generate 58 trips, looks at the chart. So you never grant a waiver because it's a 10,000 square foot building. The threshold is changing, so the same argument's gonna be made. Why do I need the study? Well, because it hit 60. Why do you need the study today? Because it hits 10,000. It's just a number. That's what you tell them. But the request for a waiver, we're still gonna get documentation the way we always do, whether it's for the 10,000 or for the particulars. But I heard your question, even if it's required, can the city engineer say it's not required under this discretionary provision? Which maybe is what you're going towards. You want to have some more criteria listed other than local knowledge.
Thank you.
But that's just what I heard you say. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
You took them right out of my mouth.
Okay.
Okay, is that it, Eric?
Yes, and yes, I am.
Very good. Patrick Hayes.
I tend to agree with Patrick just about it being a little bit vague, and I think that the discretionary ruling, I think, is a concern for me too. And I don't know if there's a way that the city is able to sort of think through, because it would seem to me that what happens in these discretionary decisions is that basically a petitioner is going to inherit some existing challenges, right? We know there's a problem here, and that's what's triggering the engineer's concern. You know, we got a problem here, so we're gonna ask you to do the study so that we can really nail it down. And the petitioner is gonna inherit some existing problems. Is there a way to sort of identify these areas now with like, an overlay, or, so that a potential petitioner would know, yeah, these are the regulations, but if I'm in these areas, I know I may be subject to some additional scrutiny, and it's likely that I'm gonna have to do something more. I think providing that additional information for those areas so that somebody's not blindsided. I think the example, you mentioned that the plaza and the folks that were looking to get into the plaza down there on Highland Avenue. And I think that, when you look at the process that we all went through during that hearing, there were letters from counselors that were saying, this intersection's a problem, and these guys have to take a look at this intersection down here. And I think that was part of what scared those guys away. They're looking at, my gosh, that's a problem today. It has nothing to do with me, and why do I gotta take care of it? So I think if there's a way to address that so that folks don't feel like they're on the hook to fix an existing problem, so it was a little more even-handed, that might be good. I also wonder, this is really related to traffic studies that are part of the special permit process. So buildings that don't require a special permit, they don't have to do a traffic study. I mean, it's interesting because Eric brought up the South Cove building that's over on Commercial Street. And, the traffic study for those guys spanned from Main Street all the way to the Fellsway. It was like half a mile plus. And the 5-story office building, which is 1 block over, with almost 200 cars, they didn't have a traffic study at all. So, it seems like there's some additional things that the city needs to be doing to address traffic studies if, the disparity there. I understand that there's a special permit, so it's the city's opportunity to sort of ask for some additional things. But I think we need to think about those other areas too and address those. And I'll talk to you offline. I don't quite understand the math on how to get the number to 60, but I'll talk to you offline about that. Okay. I don't want to waste the time. Thank you.
Well, I would encourage you, if you have comments, you should make them, because if the board is going to consider making a decision, I don't know if you're going to take it into advisement, but I would say if you had comments, you should bring them up, but I'm not trying to put you on the spot,
It's just the math.
But while they're here too, because I don't know if they're coming back.
When you run the math, I just don't understand how you get to the numbers, to 60.
I'd be happy to explain that if you like. Sure.
Go ahead.
And let me just refer to the table, and I'll take a use.
Like you mentioned supermarket before, and
Yeah,
it would take
so-
6,500 square foot supermarket
If you look, yeah, so if you look at supermarket, which on your table is a code 850, falls under retail.
Yep.
The unit of measure is 1,000 square feet. And then you have two trip factors. You have a per unit AM and a per unit PM. One is 3.82 and one is 9.24. So the changes we made have said that we use the larger one, not the smaller one.
Okay.
So you take the 9.24, and for every 1,000 square feet of supermarket, you multiply it by 9.24.
Okay.
So if you had 10,000, it would be 90.24, you'd be well into a traffic study.
Right. Okay.
And then some of the uses have different units of measure. A lot of the ones that have different units of measure are the ones that we've already exempted to automatically be traffic studies, which are residential uses, number of units. We've already kept that where it was at the 10 units. So, like I said, and I might be backtracking a little bit on how the number of 60 came up. How do we get to that? It was Yem's homework, talking to other cities and towns, kind of saying, well, how does Everett compare to Malden? How does Westford compare to Malden? And then saying, okay, well, let's try 60, running that 60 through a few of our common uses, because let's face it, every city and town has common uses, and saying, okay, yeah, that makes sense. It was really trial and error.
And
Right, so it was scenario analysis and sensitivity based on what the ITE,
Exactly.
Gotcha.
It was running a number through.
wasn't that you just picked it out and then,
Right. But we have a lot of 960 square foot convenience stores,
right.
so it made sense.
I'm sorry, Pat, go ahead.
Does that, I recognize it's the national number, the national traffic folks, but does that tie to like our own zoning for parking requirements, you know? For example, if you have a warehouse, light industry, and, you know, based on the square footage of that warehouse, you know, you need X amount of parking spaces, 100 parking spaces.
No, it has nothing to do with parking, because, again, we're talking about traffic.
Right.
So it has to do with intersections and how many people are coming through them at a given point for the purpose of going to a given place.
Right.
So you're right. Topeka, Kansas has a different sort of dynamic than Malden, than Los Angeles, California. So Yem can stop me when I'm wrong. But the ITE takes national averages and figures these numbers out for what would be a national average for the use of a walk-in bank. And then Topeka, Kansas can take that and say, well, yeah, but we have 25 people that live in the city, so we're going to use a threshold of 25. And Everett can say we want 100. Which I think 100 is kind of high, but, and I can't explain how they came up with that, but that's what the number they use.
Okay.
You all set, Patrick?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Ken Antonucci.
Yes, so I just agree with all the themes that everyone's been bringing up. I would say that I appreciate Commissioner Miller's desire to make this broad. I would actually recommend that you just leave this the way it's written. The city engineer shall make the final determination of the number of vehicle trips generated by the project. And as Michelle put it in, notwithstanding the number of trips, a traffic impact study may be required. Eliminate the rest of it and just put as determined by the city engineer. Then develop a criteria within the city engineer's office, the building commission's office, that has a list that's includes but not limited to, you know, crash data, this, that, and the other thing, right? Historical knowledge. I wouldn't, we have to remember this document here that we're looking at updating are our rules, right? So I don't think we should get into listing different types of traffic situations and this and that here. That's really not our purview. That's really the purview of the city engineer, the building commission, and our peer reviewers to give us opinions on. So I would be happy to see this even more limited, but also by just saying as determined by the city engineer would also allow that flexibility that Eric was looking for the city engineer to recommend waiving a traffic study if it's over 60. But I would definitely develop some type of objective criteria to base your review on, to Pat's point, just so that it doesn't appear that there's any kind of subjective or capricious decision-making there, really to protect your office, the city, from any kind of follow-on lawsuits or anything like that. So that's my piece.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Mrs. Miller or Eric Henry?
Yes, thanks, Chair. You mentioned something just, how did it ever get to 100?
I have no idea.
Maybe your colleague does.
No.
Okay.
We were unsuccessful in reaching out, or getting, not in reaching out, but in getting information from Everett. If I can throw a guess out there, I have a good friend who happens to be pretty high in the chain of command at the state for traffic engineering. And in conversation with him, he told me 100 is a very common number used by cities and towns in Massachusetts. Not nationwide, Massachusetts. So a lot of cities and towns just go with that. They don't really, I don't think they put the effort or the evaluation into it that we did to see how it relates particularly to their city. It's just a common number that's used.
Fair, thank you.
It's a guess.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead.
What will happen if the use doesn't fit in one of these categories?
I'd be shocked.
Okay.
They actually have a greater variety of categories than our own zoning has.
So you're comfortable that you'll be able to,
I'll put it in a category.
you'll put it in a category?
Yeah. To be fair, I haven't really looked at all of our uses and compared them to all these uses, but I know there's a lot more in here. So it feels like they would have to fall into something.
Okay. And so do you agree that the way it's written now, or if with possibly the deletion that Ken Antonucci recommended, that it could actually hit the number 60, but at the discretion of the city engineer, he could say, based on location, movement, status, the intersection was just redone, all these different factors, he could say it's not going to be required?
I think Board Member Fitzgerald's actually correct that it does appear to read that way. I can tell you that wasn't the intention. The intention was actually, if someone didn't hit 60, to give us the ability to still require one. Not if you hit 60.
But it could be
we could give them the
technically,
option to
right.
back out of it.
Okay.
And I'm speaking for Yum, which he may not be a fan of, but in my understanding of putting this together, if you hit 60, you're going for a traffic study or a waiver, and that's up to you. The intention of getting Yum's local knowledge involved was if you didn't hit 60, because let's face it, 59 to 60 is not a big deal, numerically. So you hit 59, well, maybe that should be 60. You know what I mean? We want the ability for Yum to look at it and go, well, even though you didn't hit 60, we should still do one. And possibly we can rewrite it in a way that says that.
Okay, and it's definitely the city engineer and you're going to give us something in writing on the
For what?
determination? Not obviously if you're requiring it, not if it hits I should say in any case, it could be a simple statement that says, per your rules and regs. I know you said that you look at it in the beginning, and I often get it and have to explain it as well, So this is a new level of review and administration. I would request or recommend we get something in writing from you that you've reviewed it per Rule 9E and XYZ.
Yeah.
Just for the record, so that we have it documented, because that's going to be kind of the funny new stage we're going to go through.
Going back to what was brought up,
Yeah.
this is obviously only for applications to come in for a special permit. It's not for everything else, so it's just things that are coming to this board.
Right.
I think the way it would play out is person comes in, applies, I do the initial evaluation, number comes up to something, 45. I say to them, okay, according to the initial rule, you don't have to do a traffic study. We're gonna send it to Yem and let him look at it. Yem looks at it, and one of two things happen. Yeah, that makes sense. And then both of us provide the planning board with something that says, their number came to 45, Yem looked at it, here's the reason he agrees with that. The other scenario is, Yem looked at it, he doesn't agree with that, because it's in a tough intersection, it's a tough use of whatever. We've required a traffic study. The person is then gonna use that notification from Yem to either do the traffic study
Right.
or request a waiver,
Right.
one or the other. The other thing that could happen is someone comes in, proposes a use, a size, I do the math, you have to do a traffic study. End of story. Same thing, they come to you guys and they either request a waiver or they do the traffic study. From that point forward, nothing changes. They have the right for you to waive it or they have the right to do it. That's it.
Okay, and you, for the board's reference more, if I'll just quickly add, the zoning ordinance, we're talking about, as someone said, these are your rules and procedures. The zoning ordinance, for special permits for anything other than residential, you have to make a finding that the traffic and traffic patterns generated by the proposed use will not adversely impact surrounding streets, create a traffic safety hazard. For purposes of determining traffic impact, the planning board may request an independent analysis of traffic data submitted by the petitioner, the cost of which will be borne by the petitioner. I'm going to represent that it's my understanding that you could still request a traffic study, even if it was determined under these rules, and that's how it pretty much is anyway. If you need information to make your findings, you can request that. So there is, the potential for that. I think that this will work seamlessly, and we won't ever get to that point. But if there ever is a question and you feel that there should be more information, or you need more information, I think you can request that information. It's not required automatically, but you can request it during the course of your review of the petition. Because this isn't changing the zoning. This is just changing your rules. That's it.
Okay, you all set?
Yeah.
Patrick Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to comment because it was, a couple of times it was brought up about whether or not they would have the discretion if something came in over 60, but you felt that a study wouldn't be needed. I think what you just said is appropriate, that there is no discretion above 60, that there is a denial right there. I would encourage, again, in all cases, as Michelle said, if there's some sort of written documentation about a particular subjective decision, so we have a record of it, if it's ever needed to be used to compare, if petitioner comes in here looking to waive an adverse ruling where they're saying, we're aware of certain circumstances in the X, Y, and Z where they were allowed, there wasn't a request for, or a determination that there should be a waiver under 60, and then we can use that to consistently apply our discretion when we grant a waiver. And again, I would encourage you all, if something comes in over 60, you have to tell the petitioner, sorry, we have to impose the requirement. I don't necessarily agree with it. These are the reasons why. Encourage them to come forward to us for a request for a waiver and have your reasons why submitted to us so that we may have that to consider. But I wouldn't recommend, because otherwise the number 60 means nothing. It would all just be left in the discretion of the city engineer, which, again, I don't think is prudent at this point.
Is that it, Patrick?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, does anyone else have any other questions for Mrs. Miller or Lit?
So you would support, or you said, Mr. Miller, that you would support adding language to kind of fine tune that, so that the discretion is to require it when it's below 60, not when it's above? Did you say that, or you think it should be?
Yeah, what I said was that.
The intent wasn't that.
The intent was.
Okay.
Yem's ability to review it under 60 and still require a traffic
Okay.
study. And I certainly understand the concern about providing a reason to the planning board for that. And just to, expand on that a little bit, obviously in my position in code enforcement, anytime I deny anybody of anything, I have to give it to them in writing with a reason. And we would expect the same thing to happen through this process from my office, from Yem's office, from anybody's office.
Okay, does anyone else have any other questions or comments? Do you guys have anything else you'd like to present or share?
I think we're good.
Very good. So is there a motion? And what we would be looking for, is there a motion to entertain the proposed revision, whether it's tweaking some of the wording in it. I would like to remind folks that this is, our rules are a living document. It's up to us. You know, we may find throughout the course of them generating this archive of information that Patrick referred to, that we could use, that 60 isn't the right number. Maybe it's 40, maybe it's 75, who knows? As we go through this, fortunately, we work closely with both departments. You know, if we're hearing that the numbers aren't appropriate, then I'm sure we'll be asked, or we'll have discussions about revising and updating the language or the procedure that we have. So don't feel that we're locked into this and we'll never have an opportunity to change anything as we evolve in this and we get a better sense of how this new procedure is working. Because the way I expect it to go is there will be instances where they would have been required under our current method of 10,000 square feet that won't be required under this new methodology. But by the same token, I also think there are going to be instances that currently don't have to do one under our current methodology that will trip the new transition function that they're generating. So I think it's going to kind of go both ways, and certainly the city is going to hear the feedback from the developers. But Ken Antonucci, yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the changes with two small adjustments. First is my previous statement of just eliminating the portion of the last sentence between the word required and as determined by the city engineer, so that the last sentence would read, the city engineer shall make the final determination of the number of vehicle trips generated by the project, and notwithstanding the number of trips, a traffic impact study may be required as determined by the city engineer. The second would be just the correction of the word addition, just a spelling correction to addition, E-D-I-T-I-O-N.
Which one are you looking at, Ken?
The word-
Where's that second one? I-C-E-D-I-T-I-O-N.
Right above.
Okay.
So,
Geez,
or the
I'm having
most
trouble with the
current,
colored,
most recent.
with the colored words tonight.
Look good on the screen.
Well, the most current recent, yes, addition, it should be addition. Okay. Is there a second for Ken's motion? Eric McCush.
I'll second that motion with the changes as noted.
Very good. So we have a motion to accept it.
Can you make a motion?
You okay with this?
Because that's fine.
We've got a motion on the board and it's been seconded.
Yeah, you can do that.
We'll start with the roll call once Michelle's ready.
I'm ready.
Let me get queued up ahead of time.
Mr. Chairman,
So I can
just
go ahead, Ken.
a procedural question, though, because Patrick has a suggestion on some wording. Do we have to vote this first and then agree on a change? Only where that whole question is 6
What's the change?
So, if Patrick wouldn't.
And I just asked Ken, his motion does not include the addition of the last sentence to make this clear that the necessity for a traffic impact study based on local knowledge as determined by the city engineer would only apply to projects that will generate 60 or less vehicle trips in a single hour of the day.
Yeah, well, I guess what my opinion is, I like the flexibility of not specifically defining that in case there's some unforeseen instance that we haven't thought of. So you're asking Ken, well, see now, Eric seconded it, and we go from there,
Yeah,
because it's been motioned and seconded.
that's fine.
Well,
But we
Yeah,
can do
I
that
Okay,
and then
Michelle,
amend.
go ahead and
you know,
explain
no, I
how
was
this
just,
should happen.
no, well, I was just gonna say, you haven't voted, so you can, retract your second and your motion if you want to amend it, if you do want to amend it, I
Yeah,
don't know.
so personally, I like the
Well, first, let's
flexibility.
start with Eric, who seconded it. Eric, do you want to
Do you want
add
to,
in anything that says nothing above 60?
If it's the will of the board, I mean, I'd rather just vote on it, but
Okay, so Eric will retract his
well,
I'll retract,
second.
I
No,
will
he-
retract.
And then Ken, are you willing to amend your motion?
Yes, I'll amend it, so after, as determined by the city engineer, if the number is less than 60, less than or equal to 60? Well, you want 60 to be the threshold, right? So if the number is less than 60.
So how would that read in here?
So, and notwithstanding the number of trips,
I think it would be a notwithstanding, if the number of trips is less than 60, a traffic impact study may be required.
Yeah, that's the simplest way of doing it.
yes.
Yeah.
Yep,
Okay, so Michelle, what does it read then?
It'll say,
What
if
does Ken's motion read?
yes, what am I saying? No,
you
I-
good at
want
that.
to, I mean, you
No,
can
no,
leave
no,
it
I
that
do,
way.
I'm just trying to figure out the best way to word it.
Notwithstanding,
Can you start at the city engineer?
yes, the city engineer shall make the final determination of the number of vehicle trips generated by the project. And notwithstanding, where the number of trips is less than 60, a traffic impact study may be required as determined by the city engineer.
Yes, that's perfect. That's the intent of what
I'll second
my
that, Ken.
amendment would be.
Okay, so it's been revised again. Ken's made the motion, Eric seconded.
Yep, I'm good. Oh, so now, okay,
No,
so now I'm voting.
well, wait a second. So you still want changes, Pat?
No.
No, that
Okay.
was the change, just to put in that
Okay, so
caveat of it
do you
being
have it, Michelle?
below 60.
Yes.
Okay, starting with the roll call. Go ahead, Michelle.
Ken Antonucci,
Yes,
Jim Chiavelli,
Yes.
Charles Ferguson,
Yes.
Patrick Fitzgerald,
Yes.
Patrick Hayes,
Yes.
Eric Henry,
Yes.
Eric McCush,
Yes,
Henry Susi,
Yes.
Chuck Iovan.
Yes. The change has been approved as amended. Thank you very much, guys, for coming in. Appreciate your work on this and your presentation this evening. Thank you. Okay. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the next item on our agenda is approval not required, 57 Olive Ave. Ken doesn't have to read anything. We had tabled it, or we had actually denied it at our last meeting because they hadn't paid taxes. Michelle, could you give us an update on where we are with this one?
Yes. So, as the chairman said at your last meeting, this was on the agenda for an approval not required subdivision plan. It was disapproved as a mandatory denial for failure to pay taxes. There were outstanding $4,735.12 in outstanding real estate taxes at the time you considered this, so by statute and local ordinance, you were required to deny the approval, or deny the endorsement. So you did that. The next day, the petitioner did pay the taxes in full. I have a copy of that receipt here, so it was paid in full. The This particular petition is coming before you as what's known as an approval not required subdivision. The application that was filed is known as an application for determination of planning board jurisdiction. You have a copy of the plan in front of you that's proposed. You also have a copy of the engineer's letter, which describes the plan, and you also have a copy of a legal opinion from the city solicitor. I think for the record, and this is a public meeting, not a public hearing, so abutters were not notified. We do not, there was no requirement to publish notice or send to abutters. The notice of this meeting was posted, and this was listed as an item on the agenda. So you all have the plan. It's called Plan of Land of 57 Olive Avenue in Malden, Mass. It is dated August 3rd, 2018, with revisions through June 11th, 2019. It's prepared by Paul J. Finocchio, PLS, and his office is in Wakefield. I will read into the record the letter from the engineer that describes the plan, June 11th, 2019. It reads, "Dear members of the planning board, I am the engineer of record for the owner of the above referenced property, 57 Olive Avenue, and I prepared the approval not required plan currently before the planning board for endorsement. The A&R plan depicts the division of the property into two separate parcels, Lot A and Lot 118. Lot A will contain the existing single-family home, which will continue to be accessed via Olive Avenue, a public way. Lot A has 78 feet of frontage on Olive Avenue. Lot 118 will be accessed via Monmouth Street, an existing private way. Lot 118 has 91.37 feet of frontage on Monmouth Street. Monmouth Street is currently paved at a width of 19 plus or minus feet and for a length of 183 plus or minus feet from its intersection with Curve Street, a public way. The paved portion of Monmouth Street includes 83 feet of Lot 118 frontage along the way. The maximum grade of the constructed portion of Monmouth Street is 4 to 8%, and the average grade is 6%. The condition of the pavement along Monmouth Street is good, with no significant cracking, potholes, or other deterioration. Lot 118 will be constructed with a two-car garage, at least 2 additional parking spaces, and a turnaround area, per the requirements of the variance decision issued by the Zoning Board of Appeals. Lot 118 will be tied into city's existing sewer and water lines, per the requirements of the engineering department. Moreover, the construction portion of Monmouth Street will be widened along its westerly edge by approximately 3 feet along its frontage, with Lot 118 a distance of 75 feet, with existing grades being maintained. Finally, at the request of the engineering department, the applicant has agreed to repair the city's existing storm sewer within Monmouth Street, although that storm sewer does not convey storm water from Lot 118. These improvements are listed as conditions and depicted in the inset diagram on revision 1 of the A&R plan. It is my professional opinion that Monmouth Street, as currently constructed, has sufficient width, suitable grades, and adequate construction to provide for the needs of vehicular traffic in relation to the proposed use of the land abutting thereon and served thereby. For example, 1 new single-family home, in addition to the 2 existing single-family homes. Monmouth Street already contains city water lines and sewer lines, and installation of additional municipal services will not be necessary. The proposed improvements to Monmouth Street will only serve to enhance the way's already sufficient width and adequate construction, will not alter the way's existing suitable grades. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Signed, Paul J. Finocchio. He's the engineer. So he's described what's being shown on this plan. I will note just one comment about the letter. He states that there is frontage on Monmouth Street. There is no frontage technically on Monmouth Street. There is access via Monmouth Street, but Monmouth Street is an unconstructed, for the most part, private way. Frontage, by your definition, is along a public way or an approved and endorsed private way, approved and endorsed by this board. So the reference was made in this letter to a Board of Appeal decision. This particular petitioner also applied for a variance and obtained a variance from the Board of Appeal, and that is a variance, I won't read it into the record, but that is a variance that was granted on June 20th, 2018. The variance was of frontage, so the Board of Appeal granted a variance. There is no frontage. What you just heard was a description of the access, of whether there'll be adequate access to serve the lot So again, there is no frontage technically. There is proposed access to the new proposed lot. Currently, the lot is known as 57 Olive Ave, and it currently contains 25,900 square feet. So the proposal is to divide it, so there'll be two lots. We heard about Lot A containing 13,468 square feet, and Lot 118 containing 12,431 square feet. The Lot 118, or a proposed new single-family dwelling lot, was what the petition of the Board of Appeal variance was about. You also have, for the record, and I'd like to I'll just quickly read this into the record, you have an opinion from the city solicitor, which I did ask for because this is a little unusual how this is coming to us and what's before you. So I'll read into the record. It's from Kate Fallon, city solicitor. It's dated today. It reads, request was made to furnish further information and explanation to assist the planning board in consideration of the above referenced A&R petition. This is for 57 Olive Avenue. This matter involves a plan which divides a currently existing parcel upon which a residential dwelling exists fronting Olive Avenue. The petitioner proposes to create a second residential lot from that parcel with frontage on Monmouth Street, a private way constructed to serve as access for existing residential dwellings. The proposed lot, which is the subject of request for A&R endorsement, complies with dimensional controls accepting frontage on a public way. Just as it did previously for the existing homes on Monmouth, the Board of Appeal granted the petitioner's request for a variance on June 20, 2018, which allowed for frontage on Monmouth for one new single-family dwelling. The Board of Appeal's consideration under zoning pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 10, differs from Planning Board consideration of endorsement of an approval not required plan pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 81L. Although the Board of Appeal granted the variance for frontage on a private way, the matter is now properly before the board, the Planning Board, for review in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 81P. Under subdivision control law, the board must further consider the matter of access to the lot from Monmouth Street. The board may consider that a variance of frontage on Monmouth was granted by the Board of Appeal on June 20th, 2018. Because the lot lacks frontage on a public way, the board may consider under subdivision control law whether Monmouth provides adequate access to the petitioner's lot on which the single-family residence is proposed to be constructed. The board more specifically may consider whether Monmouth Street, as proposed to be improved by the petitioner as depicted on the approval not required plan, has, in the opinion of the planning board, sufficient width, suitable grades, and adequate construction to provide for the needs of vehicular traffic in relation to the proposed use of the lot, and for the installation of municipal services to serve such lot and buildings erected or to be erected thereon. That is the consideration cited in Mass General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 81L. It is also significant for this planning board in taking any action to note in any determination that the determination is based upon the specific plan presented by the petitioner, and in the event the board determines that Monmouth provides suitable access based on the plan presented, that any modification of the plan must come back to the board for further consideration prior to any construction or alteration occurring. Please let me know if there are any questions or concerns. So as noted on this plan, in the inset, which is the small diagram on the left, it is showing where the existing edge of pavement is going to be extended. And that is by 3 feet along into the west of the existing paved roadway for a length of 75 feet along Lot 118, with the existing grade, which is being shown. You see the special conditions, the notes. The lot shall be developed for one single-family dwelling and accessory structures only. 2, the applicant shall be responsible for connecting the new dwelling to existing water and sewer service in accordance with the requirements of the Malden Engineering Department. 3, the applicant shall repair existing sewer line in Monmouth Street per request of Malden Engineering Department. 4, the applicant shall widen Monmouth Street by 3 feet along and to the west of existing paved roadway for a length of 75 feet along Lot 118, with the existing grade of 4.8% varies being maintained. See special condition detail, which is the inset. And 5, turnaround area and parking shall be provided on Lot 118 per the conditions of the Board of Appeal variance decision dated June 20th, 2018. So if you move forward and endorse this plan, these conditions are listed on the plan. This would be the plan that gets recorded at the Registry of Deeds. It has the typical endorsement block. It also has a statement that says, "This endorsement shall not be deemed to constitute any determination of compliance with the requirements of the Malden zoning ordinance." So you're endorsing it under subdivision control law. You're not making any determinations under the zoning. Any building permit that's applied for, the building commissioner, Nelson Miller, is going to review under the zoning and make sure it complies with the zoning. I will stop there in case anybody has any questions. Before I do, I will mention, as I stated at the beginning, although this is not a public hearing, and it's just a public meeting, we did receive 3 letters from city officials, and I do have those. And I'm noting that, whether or not you choose to hear them read into the record, they will be placed in the file for this property.
Right, typically, we do not entertain written or verbal testimony
That is correct.
at a public meeting.
That's correct. It's unusual that we receive these, and we did receive them late this afternoon, so for the record.
Okay, Ken Antonucci.
Michelle, I just have a question. Can you clarify, on the drawing, Monmouth Street, there's the dashed line that says edge of pavement.
Yes.
So what is paved and what is not paved?
Okay, so
Within
edge
the
of
small-
pavement indicates where it's paved, so only that portion
The smaller portion is
is
paved.
currently paved. When you look at the inset, you can see another dashed line that shows where the 3 feet, and I have a bigger copy, I know you're trying to see that, where they're going to pave another 3-foot strip to the west. I actually have 2 copies, so I'll give one to each side.
Okay, no, yeah, I can
If
see it.
anybody's interested, sorry, I should have done that at the beginning. Read it. If you guys can share that side, thank you. And you can look at this, Mr. Chairman, if you want
Okay, yeah.
to see it. If you can all share that, that would be great. So this is this, and then the inset is on the side, so.
So we can assume, or based on this plan, Monmouth Street will not be paved curb to curb? It's only going to be that end of pavement portion?
Yes, yes. When you look at this inset diagram, existing pavement will be paved further to the west, so that's towards the bottom, another 3-foot strip.
And that's just to make it 20 feet wide, is that it? I mean,
I don't, did the engineer's letter state what the width was?
it's just, it's just, so they're just widening that small paved,
They're widening it
Portion.
by 3 feet,
yep.
for a width of 3 feet, but a length of 75 feet.
Right, but the point is, it says here 40-foot wide private. It's not going to be
No.
paved 40-foot
No.
wide.
No.
It's only going to be paved what appears to be maybe 15 feet.
Well, now, if you look at the note on the top of that detail, it says existing pavement width 19 feet.
So then add another
And
3.
then add another 3, so it'll be 22 feet.
The other thing I'll note, if anybody caught this in the letter, he stated that it's already paved a length of 183 feet. So this is only showing you from the edge of the ledge, okay? So it's not getting paved, it's 183 feet from the end of existing pavement down to Curve Street. That whole length is not getting extended. It's only this portion, which this line that says ledge is apparently because there's ledge in the street. So it's only that section that's being widened 3 feet, which is approximately 75 feet.
So can we assume then that the 57 Olive Ave lot will only be accessed by Olive Ave and won't be accessed by Monmouth Street at all?
They have a property boundary shown on this plan with Monmouth, but there, as it's proposed, there is no vehicular access.
Yeah, and I think it says that in the letter, right, that the access to 57 Olive is from Olive.
Right, vehicular access. I mean,
Yeah.
technically, that property, you could walk off that property onto Monmouth today, but right now, there's no pavement, there's no paved access to any portion of 57. And under this plan, there's no proposal to have any paved access.
Okay, Ken, did you get your answer?
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
Patrick Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michelle, just, what would it ever take for this to become a public way? Or what stops anybody else from being able to get a variance if there's access that may qualify otherwise as frontage if it were in fact a public way?
Right. For it to become a public way, it would need to be constructed to city standards in terms of sidewalks, width, grade, pavement, drainage, utilities. So,
And with that ledge, it would be unlikely that this could ever become a public way.
right, so there would be two ways it could come in. It could come in for a subdivision control approval where they said, we want to construct this road, or it could come in the way it did, which was they sought a variance and said, we're not going to provide frontage. We want to vary that requirement, but yet it still has to come to you to determine that there's access. Then the third way would be to petition for it to become certified and used and maintained as a public way, which is another option, where they have to get the opinion of the city engineer and the planning department, which would be me, looking at width, grade, utilities, things like that, and then it's goes back to the city clerk, and they make that determination. So that would probably, I mean, I would think that would be unlikely. And anybody that wanted to, you know, extend it further would need to, or to provide access or use it for access would need to go through the same process. First petition for a variance of frontage, then come before this board to determine whether there's adequate access.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions for Michelle? No other questions for Michelle. Michelle, do you have anything else you need to share with us?
No, I did mention, I mentioned the letters, right? I mentioned the letters.
You did?
Okay. You don't want to know who they're from.
What's that?
Should I say who they're from?
If you want to.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. No, I didn't have anything else.
Okay, no other questions from folks? Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, you know, the letters that were received, one was from the Ward City Councilor of Ward 6, Dave Kamel, the other was from City Councilor at Large, Debbie DeMarie, and the third was from Maria Louisa, the Mayor's office, so. But those will be the three letters dated today that will go into the file. Thank you.
Okay. So if there are no more questions from Michelle, is there a motion? Eric McCush.
So just to clarify, the motion is to accept the subdivision?
The motion would be, first, you would want to make the determination that there's adequate access, specific to this particular plan, and then it would be to endorse this plan.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily that we're approving the subdivision, it's that we're based on the Board of Appeals variance and what we're seeing, that they have lot size, they have frontage or a variance, and anything else, Michelle?
Well, that in your opinion, you want to determine that according to this plan, Monmouth provides suitable access. As the improvements are shown on this plan, what they're going to do, extending the pavement, et cetera.
And suitable access to Lot 118.
Yes, that's
Because Lot
correct.
A isn't going to be accessed via Monmouth.
Right, so this is the, and then if you make that determination and finding, then you would want to endorse this plan.
Those are two separate motions or
No,
one?
it can be, I think it can be, I mean, the determination part is you know, your findings, you've discussed it if you're making that finding. The motion, I would think, endorse specific to this plan, subject to the conditions on the plan.
Okay, then, I'd like to make the motion that the determination there is suitable access via Monmouth Ave, and subject to the conditions listed in the plan, they can proceed with it.
And that
Okay.
you endorse it.
We endorse it.
Is there a second? Ken Antonucci.
I'll second.
Ken seconded Eric's motion. Give me a second, let me cue everyone up. Jim, Charlie, Patrick, Eric. Okay, whenever you're ready, Michelle?
Ken Antonucci,
Yes?
Jim Chiavelli,
No.
Charles Ferguson,
Yes.
Patrick Fitzgerald,
Yes.
Patrick Hayes,
Yes.
Eric Henry,
Yes.
Eric McCush,
Yes.
Henry Susi,
Yes.
Chuck Ioven.
Yes.
Okay. So it was just a majority vote, so you, the chairman will endorse the plan.
Very good. Next
Thank
item on the agenda should just be master plan steering update. We have not met since our last meeting. And then if Ken, if you could tell us about community preservation.
Yeah, we met last night, our regular monthly meeting. We're in the process of receiving and reviewing pre-apps for the fiscal year 2020 funding cycle. And that's we'll also be starting to draft updates to our CPC plan.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'll move on. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you,
Housing.
Ken. Michelle, if you can give us an update on the housing production plan.
Housing Production Plan Advisory Committee is going to be meeting sometime in the near future, where the group will be hopefully receiving a final draft of the housing needs assessment. There is no longer a housing production plan being produced, it's a housing needs assessment. And as soon as that becomes public, I will make sure you see it. So that should be coming up in the near future. Mayor's Working Group of Review Zoning Ordinances, that's back on the agenda because we've begun to reconvene again on that. So I'm working with the group to, at the request of the mayor, to review zoning ordinances and propose changes. You'll also hopefully be seeing that or hearing about that sometime in the near future. Of course, any amendments to zoning will come to this board for hearing, a joint hearing with the Council Ordinance Committee. I don't think it will be before the end of this season for the council. I don't think it'll be before June. It's not going to be next month, to my knowledge. This is June, so it's not going to be, probably we'll see that in the fall. That was it. But we meet every 2 weeks.
Okay, the mayor's working group on
Yeah.
to review zoning ordinances?
That's right. That's what I was just,
Oh, I thought you were still
Telling you
talking
about-
about the production.
no. I moved on, sorry.
Okay. Well, that's it then. One last item, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Jim Chiavelli. I don't know how many people know, Jim Chiavelli has accepted an exciting new opportunity out in California and will be relocating there. I'd like to thank him for his effort and time, and we look forward to seeing you back in Malden soon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. If no one has anything else, the next meeting will be July 10th. Happy 4th of July, everyone, and have a great evening. Thank you. Go Bruins.